The slap echoed through the marble lobby like a gunshot. A black man in a plain white t-shirt stood frozen, his cheek burning red, while a woman in a designer blazer trembled with rage before him. Guests stopped mid-step. Staff members held their breath. He didn't flinch. He didn't touch his face. He simply lifted his phone to his ear and spoke 6 words that would destroy her entire world. Terminate her. Effective immediately. Everyone. 9 minutes later, the entire staff was fired. But here's what nobody knew: this nobody in worn sneakers owned every inch of that 5-star resort. Who was Marcus Thompson? And what pushed a peaceful father to make that call? Comment below the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Marcus Thompson hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of him, and his old Honda Accord hummed a familiar tune of rattles and groans. He'd bought this car 11 years ago, back when Denise was still alive, back when they used to joke about upgrading someday. Someday never came for her. Cancer took her when Jalen was only 2 years old. Now it was just Marcus and his boy. Just the two of them against the world. He rubbed his eyes and checked the clock on the dashboard. 1:47 p.m. Another hour and he'd be at Silver Harbor Resort. His resort. Though nobody there knew that. His phone buzzed. A text from Jalen's grandmother. Jalen keeps asking when Saturday is coming. That boy can't wait to see you. Marcus smiled, the first real smile in days. He typed back quickly at a red light. Tell him Daddy's getting everything ready. Best vacation ever. He set the phone down and thought about his son. 8 years old, skinny as a rail with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn chin. That kid was the reason Marcus got up every morning. The reason he'd built everything he'd built. 20 years ago, Marcus Thompson had been a janitor at a Holiday Inn in Baltimore. He'd worked the night shift, pushing a mop across endless hallways while guests walked past him like he was part of the furniture. Invisible. Forgettable. Nothing. But Marcus had eyes. He watched. He learned. He saw how the managers treated certain guests like royalty and others like inconveniences. He noticed which staff members actually cared and which ones were just collecting paychecks. He studied the business from the ground up, literally starting from the floors he cleaned every night. At 25, he took out a loan he couldn't afford and bought a rundown motel outside of Richmond. Everyone told him he was crazy. His own mother said he was throwing his life away. But Marcus had a vision, and more importantly, he had something to prove. That first motel nearly killed him. He worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. He was the front desk clerk, the handyman, the housekeeper, and the accountant. When the pipes burst at 3 a.m., Marcus fixed them himself. When guests complained about the mattresses, Marcus drove to every thrift store in a 50-mile radius until he found decent replacements. Slowly, impossibly, the motel started making money. Then came the second property, then the third, then the partnerships, the investors, the expansion into luxury resorts. By 42, Marcus Thompson owned 11 properties across the eastern seaboard, employed over 2,000 people, and had a net worth that would make most Wall Street executives jealous. But he never forgot where he came from, never forgot what it felt like to be invisible. That's why he was driving his old Honda instead of the Mercedes sitting in his garage. That's why he was wearing a plain white t-shirt and faded jeans instead of a custom suit. That's why he'd booked his room at Silver Harbor under his personal email using a credit card that didn't have his company name on it. He wanted to see his resort the way a regular guest would see it. No special treatment, no management scrambling to impress the owner, just the truth. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Daniel Chen, Regional Director. Marcus answered. Daniel. Mr. Thompson, I just wanted to confirm everything is ready for your arrival. I've arranged for the presidential suite, and I've personally briefed the senior staff. Cancel all of it. Silence on the other end. Sir. I said cancel it. I'm not coming as the owner. I'm coming as Marcus Thompson, regular guest, standard room. Nobody knows who I am. You understand? More silence. Then carefully, "Sir, with all due respect, Silver Harbor is our flagship property. If there are any issues with service, I'd hate for you to." "That's exactly why I'm doing this, Daniel. I want to see what really happens when the boss isn't watching. If there are issues, I need to know." Daniel's voice tightened. "Understood, sir. I won't alert the staff." "Good. I'll be there in about an hour." "And Daniel?" "Yes, sir. If this place is running the way it should be, you've got nothing to worry about." Marcus hung up and focused on the road. The truth was, he'd been hearing things. Whispers from corporate, complaints buried in online reviews, words like unwelcoming and dismissive and made to feel uncomfortable. Nothing concrete, nothing actionable, but enough to make him uneasy. Silver Harbor was supposed to be different. When Marcus bought the property 2 years ago, he'd invested millions in renovations, hired the best staff-implemented training programs that emphasized one simple principle: every guest deserves respect. Every single one. It didn't matter if they arrived in a limousine or a 15-year-old Honda. It didn't matter if they wore Armani or Walmart. It didn't matter what color their skin was or how much money sat in their bank account. When someone walked through those doors, they were a guest, and guests deserved dignity. That was the whole point. That was Marcus's entire philosophy, built from years of being treated like he didn't matter. So why were people complaining? He was about to find out. The resort appeared on the horizon like something out of a travel magazine. Glass and steel and perfectly manicured grounds. Marcus had seen the architectural plans, had approved every design decision, but seeing it in person still took his breath away. He pulled into the main entrance and parked in the guest lot. For a moment he just sat there looking at the building he owned. His building, his dream made concrete and glass. Then he grabbed his worn suitcase from the trunk, the same suitcase he'd used when he was a janitor, the one with the scratch along the side from a Greyhound bus trip 20 years ago, and walked toward the entrance. The automatic doors slid open. Cool air washed over him. The lobby stretched wide and tall chandeliers, sparkling overhead marble floors gleaming. It was beautiful. It was everything Marcus had envisioned. A security guard stood near the entrance. Young guy, maybe mid-20s, crisp uniform. Marcus nodded at him as he passed the way. "You acknowledge another person, the way you recognize their existence." The guard glanced at Marcus. His eyes moved from the plain t-shirt to the faded jeans to the old suitcase with its visible scratch. Then he looked back down at his phone. No greeting. No nod in return. Nothing. Marcus kept walking. A bellman stood a few feet away, leaning against a luggage cart. Marcus made eye contact, expecting the man to step forward to offer assistance. That was the job. That was what bellmen did. The bellman looked at Marcus. Really looked at him. Took in the simple clothes, the tired face, the skin color that apparently told him everything he needed to know. Then he looked away and kept scrolling his phone. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just a cold, heavy recognition of something he'd hoped he'd left behind. He walked to the front desk, pulling his squeaky suitcase behind him. A young receptionist sat behind the counter typing rapidly on a computer. Marcus approached and waited. The receptionist kept typing. Marcus cleared his throat softly. The receptionist glanced up for half a second, just long enough to scan Marcus from head to toe, then returned to his screen. Marcus waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Finally, he spoke. "Excuse me. I have a reservation." The receptionist looked up again, his expression flat, bordering on annoyed. "Name? Thompson. Marcus Thompson." The young man typed slowly, each keystroke deliberate, as if the task required enormous effort. He stared at the screen for a long moment. "Check-in is at 3 p.m. You'll need to wait approximately 2 hours." Marcus absorbed that. He'd driven 3 hours. His back ached, his eyes burned from lack of sleep, but he kept his voice calm. "I understand, but I was hoping I could check in a little early. I'm pretty tired from the drive." The receptionist shook his head without a trace of sympathy. "I'm sorry, sir. Policy is policy. You'll have to wait." Policy is policy. Marcus had written those policies. He knew exactly what they said. Early check-in was available when rooms were ready. There was supposed to be flexibility, courtesy, basic human kindness. But he didn't say any of that. He just nodded slowly, accepting the answer he'd been given. Then the automatic doors slid open behind him. Marcus heard it before he saw it, the smooth whisper of expensive luggage wheels on marble, the confident click of leather dress shoes. He turned slightly and watched a man enter the lobby. White, mid-50s, tailored gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Designer briefcase, the kind of presence that announced itself without saying a word. Everything changed. The bellman who had ignored Marcus suddenly straightened up, pocketed his phone, and practically jogged toward the new arrival. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome back to Silver Harbor. May I take your luggage?" The man handed over his briefcase without acknowledgement, as if the bellman's service was simply his due. The receptionist, who had barely looked at Marcus, was now on his feet, smiling broadly, waving over another staff member. "Mr. Whitman, wonderful to see you again. Please have a seat while we prepare your room. It will only be a moment." A woman appeared with a silver tray, a warm towel, a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice. Whitman accepted both with a casual nod, then settled into a plush sofa near the window. Marcus stood there, suitcase at his side, watching. Same lobby, same time, same hotel. Completely different treatment. He turned back to the receptionist, who was already processing Whitman's check-in, fingers flying across the keyboard with sudden enthusiasm. "Excuse me." The receptionist looked over, visibly irritated by the interruption. "Yes. That gentleman just walked in at the same time I did. You told me I had to wait 2 hours, but he's checking in right now." Marcus kept his voice steady, factual. "Can you explain that?" The receptionist's face flickered with something discomfort maybe, or the recognition that he'd been caught. He glanced toward Whitman, then back at Marcus. "Mr. Whitman is a VIP member. He has priority check-in privileges." "VIP privileges?" "Yes, sir. It's part of our loyalty program." Marcus let that sit for a moment. He understood loyalty programs. He'd designed Silver Harbor's loyalty program himself. But he also understood what was really happening here, because he'd experienced it 1,000 times before. "I made a reservation," Marcus said. "I paid in full. I'm not asking for anything special. I'm just asking to be treated the same way. Is that possible?" The receptionist shifted in his seat. His eyes darted around the lobby, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. I don't have the authority to override check-in policy. If you'd like, I can call the manager." "Yes, I'd like that." The receptionist picked up the phone and spoke quietly into it, then hung up and gestured vaguely toward the side of the lobby. "Someone will be with you shortly." Marcus stepped back from the desk. He didn't sit down. He didn't pull out his phone to pass the time. He just stood there, waiting, his hand resting on the handle of his old suitcase. Inside that suitcase, tucked between his clothes, was a drawing Jalen had made. 2 stick figures on a beach holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "Daddy and me," Jalen had written in careful crooked letters. "Best vacation ever." Marcus thought about that drawing now. He thought about his son, about the world Jalen was growing up in, about the lessons he would learn from watching how people treated each other. He thought about what it meant to stand up and what it meant to stay silent. Footsteps echoed across the marble. A woman emerged from a hallway behind the front desk, heels clicking sharply with each step. She moved with the kind of authority that came from years of managing people, years of solving problems, years of believing she was always right. She stopped a few feet from Marcus and looked him over. The plain t-shirt, the faded jeans, the old suitcase, the color of his skin. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm Sophie Langford, operations manager. What seems to be the problem?" Marcus met her eyes. "I'm trying to check in. I was told to wait 2 hours, but another guest who arrived at the same time was checked in immediately. I'm asking for an explanation." Sophie's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. Mr. Whitman is a VIP guest. He's been with us for years and spends considerably more than most guests. Our policies allow for priority check-in for loyalty members. She paused, her gaze sweeping over Marcus again. If you're dissatisfied with our policies, you're welcome to cancel your reservation and find accommodations elsewhere. Find accommodations elsewhere. Marcus felt the words land like small stones in his chest. He'd built this place. He'd designed every policy approved, every training program invested millions of dollars with the explicit goal of creating a space where everyone was welcome. And here was his own employee telling him to leave. I'm not asking for special treatment, Marcus said. I'm asking for respect. I paid for a room. I drove 3 hours to get here. I'm being told to wait while someone else gets immediate service. That's not policy. That's discrimination. Something flashed in Sophie's eyes. Anger, maybe. Or the wounded pride of someone who'd never been challenged. Discrimination. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. This is a 5-star resort, Mr. Thompson. We cater to a certain clientele. If you can't understand that, then perhaps this isn't the right place for someone like you. Someone like you. The words hung in the air between them. Marcus heard what she wasn't saying. He'd heard it 1,000 times before in 1,000 different ways. The message was always the same. You don't belong here. He looked at Sophie Langford, at her expensive blazer, her perfect posture, her absolute certainty that she was right, and he made a decision. I see, he said quietly. Thank you for making that clear. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His movements were calm, deliberate, unhurried. He opened his contacts and scrolled to a name. Sophie watched him, her expression shifting from irritation to curiosity. Who are you calling? She asked. Her tone was mocking, now dismissive. Your lawyer. Good luck with that. I've dealt with people like you before. You think you can threaten me? Marcus didn't answer. He pressed the call button and lifted the phone to his ear. Sophie's patience snapped. Later, Marcus would replay this moment in his mind. He would think about what might have happened if she had stopped, if she had taken a breath, if she had possessed even a shred of self-control. But she didn't. Her face flushed red. Her hand came up fast, a blur of motion, fueled by rage and entitlement, and the absolute conviction that she could do whatever she wanted to this man, in his cheap clothes, with his old suitcase. Her palm connected with his cheek. The slap echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. Guests froze mid-step. Staff members stopped breathing. The bellman, who had been fawning over Whitman, stood paralyzed, his mouth hanging open. Even Whitman himself set down his orange juice and stared. The lobby went dead silent. Marcus didn't move. He didn't touch his face. He didn't raise his voice or his hand. He simply stood there, his cheek burning, his expression unreadable. The line connected. A voice answered. Mr. Thompson, is everything? Daniel. Marcus's voice was calm, measured, terrifyingly quiet. I need you to terminate Sophie Langford, effective immediately, and I want the entire front desk staff on this shift replaced. I'll explain when I get upstairs. He ended the call. Sophie stared at him, her face frozen in a mixture of confusion and contempt. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound full of derision. Who do you think you are? You can't just... Her phone rang. The sound cut through her words like a blade. She pulled it from her pocket, glanced at the screen, and every drop of color drained from her face. The caller ID read, Executive Office, Daniel Chen. Her hand trembled as she answered. Hello. Marcus watched her expression crumble in real time. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time she saw something that hadn't been there before. Fear. Yes, she whispered into the phone. Yes, I understand. She lowered the phone slowly, her hand still shaking. The lobby remained frozen, every eye on the scene unfolding before them. Marcus picked up his suitcase and walked toward the elevator. His footsteps echoed in the silence. Behind him, Sophie Langford stood in the middle of the marble floor, her world collapsing around her, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of her mistake. She had just slapped the owner of Silver Harbor Resort across the face, and now she was about to lose everything. Sophie Langford couldn't move. Her legs had turned to concrete. Her lungs had forgotten how to work, and her mind was spinning in circles, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The phone was still clutched in her trembling hand, Daniel Chen's voice still echoing in her ears. "Do you have any idea who you just assaulted? That man owns this entire resort. He owns your job. He owns everything you're standing on right now. Security is on the way. Do not move. Do not speak to anyone. Do not make this any worse than you already have." The line had gone dead, but Sophie stood frozen, staring at the elevator where Marcus Thompson had disappeared just moments ago. The same man she had dismissed, the same man she had mocked, the same man whose face she had slapped with her own hand. He owned everything. Her throat closed up, her vision blurred. She heard her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, drowning out everything else. Around her, the lobby had erupted into chaos. Guests were whispering, pointing, holding up phones. Staff members were exchanging panicked looks, trying to figure out what had just happened and what it meant for them. The receptionist, Tyler, his name was Tyler, stepped out from behind the desk, his face ashen. Sophie, what's going on? Who was that guy?" Sophie couldn't answer. She couldn't even look at him. She just stood there, shaking her hand, still raised slightly, as if she could somehow take back what she'd done. "Sophie." Tyler grabbed her arm, and she finally snapped back into the moment. She looked at him with wild eyes. "He owns the hotel," she whispered. "That man. He owns Silver Harbor. All of it." Tyler's face went white. "What?" "I hit him." Sophie's voice cracked. "I hit the owner. In front of everyone. I called him. I said he didn't belong here. I told him to leave." Tyler stepped back like she was contagious. His eyes darted around the lobby, already calculating the damage, already trying to figure out how to distance himself from the disaster. "Oh my God," he breathed. "Oh my God. Sophie, what did you do?" "I didn't know." The words exploded out of her, high-pitched and desperate. "How was I supposed to know? He looked like—" He was wearing a t-shirt. His suitcase was old. He didn't look like— She stopped herself, but it was too late. The words hung in the air, ugly and exposed. He didn't look like what? Like a wealthy man, like someone who mattered, like someone who deserved respect, like someone who was white. The truth of what she had done crashed over Sophie like a wave. This wasn't just about losing her job. This wasn't just about embarrassment. She had revealed something about herself that she had kept hidden for years, buried under professional smiles and policy manuals, and the careful performance of neutrality. She had looked at a black man in simple clothes and decided he was nothing. And now, everyone knew it. The elevator doors opened across the lobby, and 2 security officers stepped out. They walked with purpose, their faces grim, heading straight toward Sophie. "Ms. Langford." The first officer spoke without emotion. "You need to come with us." "Wait." Sophie held up her hands, backing away. "Wait, please. I need to explain. I need to talk to him. There's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, ma'am. Mr. Chen is on his way. You'll wait in the conference room until he arrives." Sophie looked around desperately, searching for an ally, a sympathetic face, anyone who might help her. But the staff members who had been her colleagues for 8 years wouldn't meet her eyes. The guests who had witnessed her outburst were staring at her with a mixture of shock and disgust. She was completely alone. The security officers flanked her, each taking an arm, and began guiding her toward the back hallway. Sophie's heels stumbled on the marble floor. Tears streamed down her face, smearing her makeup into dark rivulets. "Please," she whispered. "Please. I have a daughter. She's in college. I'm paying her tuition. I can't lose this job. Please." The officers didn't respond. They just kept walking. Behind her, the lobby remained frozen in the aftermath of the explosion. Tyler stood behind the front desk, his mind racing. The bellman had vanished entirely, probably hoping to disappear before anyone remembered he'd been part of this. The security guard who had ignored Marcus at the entrance was standing ramrod straight, suddenly very interested in doing his job correctly. And upstairs in a room overlooking the ocean, Marcus Thompson sat alone with his thoughts. He hadn't moved since entering the room. He'd set his suitcase down by the door, walked to the window, and stood there staring at the waves. His cheek still burned from Sophie's slap, but he barely noticed the physical sensation. The pain he felt was deeper than that. He thought about his father. James Thompson had been a factory worker in Detroit, a man who came home every night with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his bones. He'd worked 32 years at the same plant, never complained, never asked for more than he was owed. And every single day, he'd walked through a world that told him he wasn't good enough. Marcus remembered being 12 years old, walking into a department store with his father to buy a birthday present for his mother. They'd been followed by security from the moment they entered. A sales clerk had asked them 3 times if they needed help finding the exit. When his father tried to pay with a credit card, the cashier had called for a manager to verify it wasn't stolen. James Thompson had stood there, his jaw tight, his dignity wrapped around him like armor, and he'd completed the transaction without saying a word. But on the drive home, Marcus had seen his father's hands shaking on the steering wheel. "Why didn't you say anything?" Marcus had asked. "Why didn't you tell them they were wrong?" His father had been quiet for a long moment. Then he'd said something that Marcus never forgot. "Sometimes, son, the world isn't ready to see you as a man. But that doesn't mean you stop being one. You hold your head high, you do your job, and you build something so big that they can't ignore you anymore. That's how you win, not by fighting their fight, but by building your own." Marcus had spent his whole life building businesses, building wealth, building a legacy for his son. And somewhere along the way, he'd started to believe that maybe his father had been wrong. Maybe the world had changed. Maybe things were better now. Today had reminded him that they weren't. He turned away from the window when he heard the knock at the door. "Mr. Thompson," a voice called from the hallway. "It's Daniel Chen. May I come in?" Marcus crossed the room and opened the door. Daniel stood there looking like he'd aged 10 years in the last 20 minutes. His suit was rumpled, his tie was crooked, and there was sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Come in," Marcus said. Daniel entered the room and immediately launched into apologies. "Sir, I don't even know where to begin. I am so deeply sorry. This is completely unacceptable. I take full responsibility. The staff, the training, the culture. This happened under my watch and I—" "Daniel." Marcus held up a hand. "Stop." Daniel stopped. He stood there, hands clasped in front of him, looking like a man awaiting execution. Marcus walked back to the window and looked out at the ocean. When he spoke, his voice was calm but heavy. "How long have you been with the company?" 3 years, sir." "And in those 3 years, how many complaints have there been about this property, about guests being treated differently based on how they looked or how much they were spending?" Daniel hesitated. "There have been some. A few mentions in online reviews, some comments in guest surveys. Nothing that rose to the level of—" "Nothing that rose to the level of what?" Marcus turned to face him. "Nothing that rose to the level of someone being slapped in the face. Is that the threshold now? We wait until it gets physical before we take it seriously." Daniel's face reddened. "No, sir. That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" The regional director stood silent, searching for words that wouldn't make things worse. Finally, he said, "I meant that we addressed the issues as they arose. Coaching sessions, reminders about company values. We thought we were handling it. You thought wrong." Marcus sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling the full weight of his exhaustion. He'd driven 3 hours. He'd been disrespected, dismissed, and assaulted in his own hotel. And now he was having a conversation he'd had 100 times before with managers who always had the same excuses. We thought we were handling it. It was an isolated incident. We didn't realize it was this bad. Let me tell you something, Daniel. Marcus's voice was quiet now, almost gentle, which somehow made it more devastating. I started this company because of moments like today. When I was a janitor, I watched wealthy guests get treated like royalty, while families who'd saved for months to afford one night were treated like inconveniences. I watched staff members decide who mattered and who didn't, based on the clothes they wore and the color of their skin. And I told myself that if I ever had the power to change that, I would. He paused, letting the words sink in. I built Silver Harbor to be different. Every policy, every training program, every hiring decision was designed to create a place where anyone could feel welcome. I thought I'd succeeded, but what happened today? He shook his head. That woman didn't just disrespect me. She revealed a rot that goes much deeper than one bad employee. Daniel's shoulders sagged. What would you like me to do, sir? I want answers. I want to know how this happened. I want to know who else was involved and who looked the other way. And I want to know if this is happening at our other properties. I'll begin a full investigation immediately. You'll do more than that. Marcus stood up and walked toward Daniel, stopping just a few feet away. You'll personally review every guest complaint from the last 2 years. Not just the formal ones, the reviews, the surveys, the casual comments. I want to know every time a guest felt unwelcome at one of my hotels, and I want a plan to fix it on my desk within 72 hours. Daniel nodded rapidly. Yes, sir. Absolutely. One more thing. Marcus's eyes locked onto Daniel's. Sophie Langford. What's her situation? She's in the conference room now waiting for the formal termination meeting. Security is with her. I've also suspended the front desk staff who were on duty during the incident pending investigation. Has anyone spoken to her? Not yet. I wanted to check with you first about how to proceed. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He thought about Sophie on the floor of the lobby, sobbing, her world falling apart. He thought about her daughter in college, the tuition payments, the bills that wouldn't stop coming just because her mother had made a terrible mistake. He thought about Mercy and whether she deserved it. I'll speak to her myself, he said finally. Daniel looked startled. Sir, that's not necessary. I can handle... No, I need to do this. Where's the conference room? 3rd floor, East Wing. But Mr. Thompson, are you sure? After what she did to you, I would completely understand if you wanted to stay as far away from her as possible. Marcus touched his cheek absently, feeling the faint sting where Sophie's hand had connected. She needs to hear something, and I need to say it. He walked past Daniel toward the door, then stopped. And Daniel, make sure the staff knows this came from me directly. I don't want anyone thinking they can hide behind middle management. Every person in this hotel answers to me whether they know it or not. Today, they're going to learn that. He stepped into the hallway, and Daniel followed, hurrying to keep up with Marcus's long strides. The conference room was cold and quiet when Marcus entered. Sophie sat at the far end of a long table, her eyes red and swollen, her makeup destroyed. 2 security officers stood by the door. A pitcher of water sat untouched in front of her. She looked up when he walked in, and Marcus saw something break behind her eyes. Whatever hope she'd been clinging to evaporated the moment she saw his face. Leave us, Marcus said to the security officers. They exchanged uncertain glances. Sir, are you sure? Leave us. They left, closing the door behind them. Marcus sat down across from Sophie, the long table stretching between them like a battlefield. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The silence was thick, oppressive, filled with everything that had happened and everything that was about to be said. Sophie broke first. I'm sorry. The words came out in a rush, desperate and raw. I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were. If I had known, I never would have... Stop. Marcus's voice was firm, but not angry. That's exactly the problem. Sophie blinked, confused. What? You said if you had known who I was, you never would have treated me that way. But don't you see that's the whole point? You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic human dignity. Sophie's mouth opened, then closed. She had no response to that. Marcus leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. Let me ask you something. When I walked into that lobby today, what did you see? Sophie looked down at her hands. I mean, tell me the truth. What did you see? A long pause. Then quietly. I saw a man who didn't look like he belonged here. Why not? Because... She struggled to find words that wouldn't incriminate her further, but there weren't any. Because of how he was dressed. Because of the old suitcase. Because I'm black. The word hung in the air between them. Sophie flinched like she'd been slapped. I'm not racist, she whispered. I'm not. I don't have a problem with black people. I have black friends. I've worked with black colleagues for years. I don't... Sophie. Marcus cut her off gently. I'm not here to argue about whether you're racist. I'm not inside your head. I don't know what's in your heart. But I know what I experienced today. I know how you looked at me. I know the tone of your voice when you told me this wasn't the right place for someone like me. And I know that when you got angry, you didn't think twice about putting your hands on me. Sophie's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks again. Would you have slapped Mr. Whitman? Marcus asked quietly. If he had complained the same way I did, would you have hit him? The silence was answer enough. Marcus sat back in his chair and studied the woman across from him. 8 years she'd worked here. By all accounts, she'd been good at her job, efficient, organized, capable of handling difficult situations. But somewhere along the way, she'd absorbed a belief that was so common it had become invisible that some people mattered more than others, and you could tell who was who just by looking at them. It wasn't unique to her. Marcus had seen it everywhere, in every business he'd owned, in every city he'd lived in every interaction with people who thought they knew his worth at a glance. The only difference today was that Sophie had made her beliefs explicit. She had crossed a line that most people knew never to cross. And now she was paying for it. What's going to happen to me? Sophie asked, her voice small. You're terminated. Effective immediately. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. She'd known that was coming. What about? Are you going to press charges for the assault? Marcus considered the question. He had every right to. There were witnesses, there would be security footage, and the slap had been hard enough to leave a mark. Any lawyer would tell him he had a case. But he thought about his father again. About the quiet strength it took to walk through a hostile world and still hold on to your humanity. About what it meant to win without becoming what you hated. No, he said finally. I'm not going to press charges, and I'm not going to blacklist you. When potential employers call for references, we'll confirm your dates of employment and leave it at that. What happened here stays here. Sophie looked up, stunned. Why? After what I did to you, why would you? Because destroying your life doesn't fix anything. You made a mistake, a terrible one, and you're losing your job because of it. That's the consequence. But I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in change. He stood up, pushing his chair back from the table. What I want you to do, Sophie, is think about why this happened. Not just today, but all the years leading up to it. Think about every guest you looked at and decided didn't matter. Every time you let your staff treat someone poorly because they weren't spending enough money. Every assumption you made about who deserved respect and who didn't. He walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at her. And if you ever manage another hotel, another restaurant, another business where you interact with the public, remember this day. Remember how it felt to be on the other side. And do better. He opened the door and stepped into the hallway, leaving Sophie alone with the wreckage of her career. Outside the conference room, Daniel was waiting. His phone clutched in his hand, his face lined with anxiety. Mr. Thompson, I've started the investigation. We're pulling security footage now and cross-referencing guest complaints. I've also drafted a message to all staff about what happened today. Would you like to review it before I send it? Marcus took the phone and read the message. It was careful corporate sanitized. It talked about upholding company values and maintaining standards of excellence. It said nothing about discrimination, nothing about accountability, nothing real. He handed the phone back. Rewrite it. Sir, I want the staff to know exactly what happened today. Don't hide behind corporate language. Tell them that an employee was terminated because she discriminated against a guest and then assaulted him. Tell them that the entire front desk team has been suspended pending investigation. Tell them that this came directly from me and that anyone who doesn't share our values is welcome to find employment elsewhere. Daniel's eyes widened. That's very direct. That's the point. I'm tired of dancing around the problem. The only way to change culture is to name it. Send the message tonight. I want every employee to read it before their next shift. Yes, sir. Marcus started walking toward the elevator, then paused. One more thing. The bellman who was on duty today, the one who was too busy scrolling his phone to help me with my luggage. What's his status? Daniel checked his notes. Kevin Morrison. He's been suspended along with the others. Good. And the security guard at the entrance. The one who couldn't be bothered to acknowledge my existence. James Hendricks, also suspended. Marcus nodded slowly. It wasn't enough. Suspension was a placeholder, not a solution. But it was a start. I want interviews with all of them, he said. I want to understand what they saw, what they were thinking, and whether they've ever behaved this way before. If this is a pattern, they're gone. If it was a one-time failure of judgment, we can discuss training and second chances. But I need the truth first. I'll schedule the interviews for tomorrow. And Daniel, yes, sir. I came here to rest. I came here to spend a few quiet days by the ocean before my son arrives on Saturday. Instead, I've spent the afternoon firing people and investigating discrimination at my own resort. That's not how this was supposed to go. Daniel's face fell. I'm so sorry, sir. I can only imagine how disappointing this must be. It is disappointing, but it's also clarifying. Marcus stepped into the elevator and turned to face Daniel before the doors closed. I've spent 2 years believing that good policies and good training were enough to create a good culture. Today I learned that I was wrong. Culture isn't what you write in a manual. It's what happens when nobody's watching. And clearly when I'm not watching, things happen that shouldn't. The doors began to close. That's going to change, Marcus said. Starting now. The elevator rose toward his floor, and Marcus leaned against the wall, finally allowing himself to feel the exhaustion he'd been pushing aside. His body ached. His cheek throbbed. His heart was heavy with the weight of what he'd witnessed and what he'd had to do. But underneath all of that, there was something else. A quiet resolve, a renewed sense of purpose. He had built Silver Harbor to be different, and by God it was going to be different, even if he had to tear it down to the studs and rebuild it himself. When he reached his room, he went straight to his suitcase and pulled out Jalen's drawing. He propped it up against the lamp on the desk, just like he'd planned, and stared at it for a long moment. 2 stick figures on a beach. Daddy and me. Best vacation ever. That was still going to happen. No matter what had gone wrong today, Marcus was going to give his son the vacation he'd promised. They would build sandcastles. They would swim in the ocean. They would eat too much ice cream and stay up too late watching movies. But first, Marcus had work to do. He had a culture to fix, a message to send, and a standard to set. He picked up his phone and called the one person he trusted most in the world. Hey, baby. Jalen's grandmother answered on the second ring. How's the resort? It's complicated, Marcus said honestly. Is Jalen there? He's right here. Hold on. A moment later, his son's voice came through the speaker, bright and excited. Daddy, are you at the beach? Is it big? Is the hotel cool? Can I bring my boogie board? Marcus smiled, the first real smile since he'd arrived. Yes, very cool, and absolutely, you can bring your boogie board. How was school today? It was good. We learned about dolphins. Did you know they talk to each other with clicks and whistles? I want to see a dolphin on our trip. Can we see dolphins? We'll try, buddy. I promise we'll try. They talked for 20 minutes about dolphins and sandcastles, and whether the hotel had a pool with a water slide. By the time Marcus hung up, the tension in his shoulders had eased, and the darkness of the day felt a little farther away. He was still angry. He was still hurt. But he was also still a father, still a man with responsibilities that extended far beyond this one terrible afternoon. Tomorrow the investigation would begin in earnest. Tomorrow he would face the reality of what his resort had become and figure out how to fix it. Tomorrow there would be difficult conversations, hard decisions, and probably more disappointment. But tonight he was going to order room service, take a hot shower, and try to get some sleep. He was going to let his body recover from the 3-hour drive and the emotional whiplash of being treated like a nobody in a place that belonged to him. And on Saturday, when his son arrived with his boogie board and his dreams of dolphins, Marcus was going to be the father Jalen needed. That was a promise he intended to keep. He walked to the window and looked out at the ocean one more time. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The waves rolled in steady and eternal, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in the buildings along the shore. Somewhere in this hotel, Sophie Langford was packing up her desk, gathering the remnants of a career that had ended in disgrace. Somewhere, Tyler the receptionist was wondering if he still had a job. Somewhere, Daniel Chen was rewriting his message to staff, trying to find words that would convey the gravity of what had happened. And here in this quiet room, Marcus Thompson sat with his son's drawing and thought about everything he still needed to build. The next morning came too quickly. Marcus woke at 5:47 a.m., his body still running on the rhythm of too many early mornings and not enough rest. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then the events of yesterday came flooding back, and he lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight settle onto his chest all over again. He showered, dressed in the same simple clothes he'd worn yesterday, a fresh t-shirt, jeans, his worn sneakers, and headed downstairs. He wasn't going to change who he was just because people now knew his name. If anything, he wanted them to see him exactly as he'd appeared before. The clothes hadn't been the problem. The assumptions had been. The lobby was quiet at this hour, the morning shift just beginning to trickle in. A different receptionist stood behind the front desk, now a young woman with nervous eyes who straightened the moment she saw Marcus step off the elevator. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson." Her voice was tight, overly formal. "Is there anything I can get for you? Coffee, breakfast? I can have the chef prepare something special." "Just coffee," Marcus said. "Black. And please relax. I'm not here to fire you." The woman's smile flickered uncertainly. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." She practically ran toward the cafe, and Marcus felt a familiar heaviness settle in his stomach. This was the other side of power, the way it changed how people saw you, how they acted around you. Yesterday, he'd been invisible. Today, he was terrifying. Neither felt like the truth. He found a quiet corner in the lobby and sat down, pulling out his phone to check emails. Daniel had sent him 3 messages overnight, each one detailing progress on the investigation. The security footage had been reviewed. Interviews were scheduled for this morning. A preliminary report would be ready by noon. Marcus was reading through the details when a shadow fell across his table. He looked up and saw an older black woman standing there, maybe mid-60s, wearing the uniform of the housekeeping staff. Her hands were clasped in front of her, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. "Mr. Thompson." Her voice was soft but steady. "My name is Dorothy Williams. I've worked here for 6 years. I was wondering if I could speak with you for a moment." Marcus gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit down." Dorothy sat, but she perched on the edge of the seat, like she was ready to flee at any moment. Her eyes darted around the lobby, checking to see who might be watching. "I heard about what happened yesterday," she said quietly. "Everyone has. And I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you were treated that way. It wasn't right." "Thank you, Dorothy. I appreciate that." She hesitated, her fingers twisting together in her lap. "There's something else. Something I think you should know." Marcus set down his phone and gave her his full attention. "I'm listening." Dorothy took a deep breath. "What happened to you yesterday? It wasn't the first time. It's been happening for a long time. Not just with Ms. Langford, with others too. The way certain guests get treated, the way staff talks about people when they think no one's listening." She paused, her voice dropping even lower. "I've seen it, I've heard it, and I've never said anything because I was afraid of losing my job." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "Can you give me examples?" Dorothy nodded slowly. "Last month there was a family. Black family, nice folks drove up from Georgia for their anniversary. They'd saved up for months to stay here, you could tell. They were so excited when they walked in." Her voice grew heavy with the memory. "The front desk made them wait 45 minutes to check in. Kept saying there was a problem with their reservation. Meanwhile, 3 other families checked in right in front of them. All white. No problems at all. Did anyone file a complaint?" "They did. Wrote a review online, too. Nothing happened. Management said it was just a computer glitch." Dorothy shook her head. "It wasn't a glitch. I saw Tyler's face when they walked in. He didn't want to help them. He just didn't want to." Marcus absorbed this information, feeling the familiar burn of anger mixed with sadness. This was exactly what he'd feared. Not an isolated incident, but a pattern, a culture. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked gently. "You said you were afraid of losing your job. That risk hasn't changed." Dorothy met his eyes, and he saw something fierce behind the fear. "Because yesterday I watched that woman slap you. I watched her treat you like you were nothing, like you didn't matter. And when I found out who you really were, I thought, maybe things can actually change now. Maybe someone with power actually cares." She leaned forward, her voice urgent. "I have a grandson, Mr. Thompson. He's 12 years old, sweetest boy you ever met. And every time I see how certain people get treated in this hotel, I think about him. I think about the world he's growing up in. I think about all the places he's going to walk into where people will look at him and decide he doesn't belong." Her eyes glistened with tears she was fighting to hold back. "I don't want that for him. I don't want him to feel invisible the way I've felt invisible for 60 years. So I'm telling you the truth, even though I'm scared. Because maybe, just maybe, you can fix this." Marcus reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you for your courage. I promise you I'm going to do everything I can." Dorothy wiped her eyes quickly and stood up. "I should get back to work. I've already taken too long." "Dorothy." Marcus stood as well. "Would you be willing to speak to my regional director to share what you've told me as part of the official investigation?" She hesitated, fear flickering across her face again. Then she straightened her shoulders. "Yes. Yes, I will. It's time someone told the truth." She walked away, and Marcus watched her go, his heart heavy with the weight of everything she'd shared. 6 years she'd worked here. 6 years of watching, witnessing, staying silent because she had bills to pay and a family to support. How many others were there like her? How many people had seen things they were afraid to report? He picked up his phone and called Daniel. "Mr. Thompson, good morning. I was just about to—" "Change of plans," Marcus interrupted. "I want you to set up anonymous interviews with the housekeeping staff, the maintenance workers, the kitchen crew, everyone who works behind the scenes. Not just the front-facing employees. I want to hear from the people who see everything, but never get asked." There was a pause on the line. "Sir, that's a significant undertaking. We're talking about over 100 employees." "Then it's a significant undertaking. Make it happen." "Yes, sir. I'll start organizing it today." Marcus hung up and sat back down, his coffee growing cold in front of him. The morning light was streaming through the lobby windows now, and guests were beginning to emerge from the elevators heading for breakfast, ready to start their vacations. None of them knew what was happening behind the scenes. None of them knew about the investigation, the terminations, the reckoning that was slowly unfolding. That was probably for the best. They'd paid for a peaceful getaway, not a front-row seat to institutional failure. But Marcus couldn't unsee what he'd seen. Couldn't unhear what Dorothy had told him. The resort he'd built to be different had become exactly what he'd been trying to escape, and now he had to tear it down and rebuild it, one truth at a time. The first interview was scheduled for 9 a.m. Marcus had insisted on being present despite Daniel's objections that it might intimidate the staff. He wanted to see their faces, hear their voices, judge for himself whether they were being honest or just telling him what they thought he wanted to hear. Kevin Morrison, the bellman who had ignored Marcus in the lobby, sat across the table looking like he hadn't slept in days. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes were red, and his leg bounced nervously under the table. Daniel sat beside Marcus, a tablet in front of him displaying Kevin's personnel file. The room was small, windowless, deliberately uncomfortable. "Kevin," Daniel began. "Thank you for coming in. We'd like to ask you some questions about what happened yesterday." "I know why I'm here." Kevin's voice was thin, defensive. "I screwed up, I admit it. I should have helped him with his luggage. I wasn't thinking." Marcus spoke for the first time. "What were you thinking?" Kevin's eyes darted toward him, then away. "I don't know. Nothing. I was on my phone, I wasn't paying attention." "You were paying attention enough to help Mr. Whitman the moment he walked in." Kevin's face flushed. "That's different. Mr. Whitman is a regular. He tips well. I know him." "So your service depends on whether someone tips well?" "No, I didn't mean it like that. I just meant—" "What did you mean, Kevin?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice calm but relentless. "Help me understand. When you looked at me yesterday, what did you see?" Kevin squirmed in his seat. His eyes went to Daniel looking for rescue, but Daniel's face was stone. "I saw a guy. Just a regular guy. I didn't think he was anyone special. And because I wasn't anyone special, I didn't deserve your help. That's not—" Kevin stopped, his mouth working silently. He looked down at the table, his shoulders slumping. "Okay, fine. You want the truth? You looked like you couldn't afford to be here. Your clothes, your suitcase, everything about you said budget traveler. And I figured, why bother? You weren't going to tip anyway." The words hung in the air, ugly and honest. Marcus nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling the truth. Now tell me, this is that how you treat all guests who don't look wealthy? Or was there something else about me that made you decide I wasn't worth your time?" Kevin's face went from red to pale. "I'm not racist, if that's what you're asking." "I'm not asking what you are. I'm asking what you did. Was it just the clothes? Or was it also the skin?" A long, painful silence. "I don't know," Kevin whispered finally. "Maybe. I don't think I'm prejudiced, but maybe I have some, I don't know, blind spots, things I don't even realize I'm doing." Marcus sat back. It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it was an honest one. Kevin wasn't a monster. He was something more complicated, an ordinary person who had absorbed the biases of the world around him without ever examining them. He'd never questioned why he jumped to serve some guests and ignored others. He'd never thought about what his assumptions revealed about his values. "Kevin, I'm going to give you a choice," Marcus said. "You can be terminated today, or you can stay on probation for 6 months while you complete an intensive training program on unconscious bias and equitable service. If you complete the program and demonstrate genuine change, you keep your job. If you don't, you're gone." Kevin looked up, surprise breaking through the shame on his face. You're giving me another chance. I'm giving you an opportunity to change. What you do with it is up to you." "I'll take it. I swear I'll do whatever it takes. I don't want to lose this job, and I don't want to be the kind of person who treats people that way." Marcus nodded. Then prove it. Starting now. You can go. Kevin stood up quickly, nearly knocking over his chair in his haste. At the door, he paused and looked back. Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry. I really am. What happened yesterday? It was wrong, all of it. And I'm sorry I was part of it. He left, and the room fell silent. Daniel exhaled slowly. That was generous of you, sir. I thought for sure you'd terminate him. He's not the disease. He's a symptom. Firing him doesn't solve anything if the culture that created him stays the same. Daniel nodded, making notes on his tablet. The next interview is James Hendricks, the security guard. He's waiting outside. Send him in. James Hendricks was a different story. He walked in with his chin high, and his shoulders squared the posture of a man who believed he'd done nothing wrong. He was ex-military, according to his file, 10 years in the Army, discharged, honorably worked private security for 3 years before joining Silver Harbor. Mr. Hendricks? Daniel gestured to the chair. Please have a seat. James sat down, his movements precise and controlled. His eyes met Marcus's without flinching. Before we begin, James said, I want to state for the record that I don't believe I did anything wrong. I was doing my job. I was monitoring the entrance for security threats. I wasn't aware that greeting every guest who walked through the door was part of my responsibilities. Marcus studied him for a moment. When Mr. Whitman walked in, did you greet him? James's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Mr. Whitman is a known guest. I've seen him many times before. So you greeted him because you recognized him. I acknowledged him because he posed no security concern. And I did pose a security concern. James's eyes flickered. I didn't say that. But you thought it. When you looked at me, what did you see? A guest or a threat? The silence stretched. James's composure was beginning to crack, small fissures appearing in his military discipline. I saw an unfamiliar individual in casual attire, he said finally. In my experience, dress and demeanor can indicate intent. I was being cautious. Cautious? Marcus repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. Tell me, James, in your 10 years in the Army, did you serve with black soldiers? James blinked, thrown by the change in direction. Of course, many of them. And did their dress and demeanor indicate different intent than your white colleagues? No, of course not. We were all soldiers. We were all brothers. But here in this lobby, when a black man walks in wearing a t-shirt and jeans, you see something different, something that requires caution. Marcus leaned forward. Help me understand how those two things coexist in the same mind. For the first time, James's composure cracked completely. His jaw worked silently, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Marcus could see the war happening behind his eyes, the man he believed himself to be fighting against the man his actions revealed. James stopped. Started again. I don't have an answer for that. I thought I'd dealt with all this. I thought I was better than this. But maybe I'm not as far along as I thought. Marcus nodded slowly. This was the hardest part, watching someone confront the gap between their self-image and their reality. It was painful, humiliating, necessary. You have the same choice as Kevin, Marcus said. Termination or probation with mandatory training. But I'm going to add something for you specifically. I want you to have coffee once a week with Dorothy Williams. She's worked here 6 years. She has a lot to teach you about what it feels like to be seen as a threat just because of how you look. James's face registered surprise, then something that might have been shame. I know Dorothy. She's a good woman. Then learn from her. And maybe next time a black man walks through those doors, you'll see a guest instead of a problem. James stood up, his military bearing somewhat diminished. Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. He left, and Marcus rubbed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion settling deeper into his bones. How many more? He asked Daniel. Tyler Chen, the receptionist, is next. And then we have preliminary statements from 4 other staff members who witnessed the incident. Let's keep going. Tyler Chen was 24 years old and looked like he might pass out at any moment. His hands shook as he sat down and his voice cracked when he spoke. "Mr. Thompson, I am so sorry. I had no idea who you were. If you had known, you would have treated me differently." Marcus finished the sentence for him, the same words he'd said to Sophie. "That's the problem, Tyler. Your service shouldn't depend on who I am. It should be the same for everyone." Tyler nodded frantically. I know that now. I've been thinking about it all night. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, and I kept thinking about how I would have felt if someone treated my mother that way, or my sister. And how would you have felt? Angry, humiliated, like I wanted to burn the place down. Now you understand how I felt. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. He wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. "I'm not a bad person. I swear I'm not. I got caught up in the culture here. Everyone talks about the VIP guests, the big spenders, the people who matter. And somewhere along the way, I started thinking that meant everyone else didn't matter. I didn't even realize I was doing it until yesterday." Marcus studied the young man's face, searching for sincerity. What he saw was someone who was genuinely shaken, genuinely confronting his own failures for perhaps the first time in his life. "Tyler, how long have you worked here?" 14 months. "And in 14 months, did anyone ever tell you that all guests deserved equal treatment?" Tyler hesitated. "I went through the training when I started, the modules about customer service and anti-discrimination. But after that," he trailed off. "After that, it was just about hitting numbers. Room bookings, upsells, VIP satisfaction scores. Nobody talked about regular guests. Nobody seemed to care about them." Marcus filed that information away. It confirmed what he'd suspected: the training existed, but it wasn't reinforced. The values were written in manuals that nobody read after their first week. The real culture, the day-to-day reality, was shaped by metrics that prioritized wealthy guests over everyone else. That had to change. "You're on probation," Marcus told Tyler. "Same terms as the others. Complete the training, demonstrate real change, and you keep your job. But I'm also going to ask you to be part of a working group that redesigns our guest service standards. I want people who've seen the problem from the inside helping to fix it." Tyler looked stunned. "You want my help?" "After what I did?" "You made a mistake. Now you have a chance to make sure others don't make the same one. Are you willing to do that?" "Yes, absolutely yes. I won't let you down." Marcus hoped that was true. He'd given chances to people before, and sometimes it worked out. Sometimes it didn't. But he believed in the possibility of change even when the evidence argued against it. It was nearly noon by the time the interviews concluded. Marcus had spoken to 9 employees in total, hearing variations of the same story. Assumptions made biases, unexamined a culture that rewarded service to the wealthy and ignored everyone else. Only 2 of them had been terminated outright. One was a bartender who'd made a racist joke about Marcus in the staff break room the night before, apparently unaware that the story had already spread about who the scruffy guy in the lobby really was. The other was a supervisor who had been named in multiple guest complaints over the past 2 years and had somehow avoided any consequences. The rest were on probation, their futures dependent on whether they could actually change. Daniel walked Marcus back toward the elevator, summarizing the findings. "The pattern is clear, sir. There's been systematic preferential treatment for high-spending guests combined with dismissive or hostile treatment for guests perceived as less valuable. Most of the staff didn't think of it as discrimination, they thought of it as good business. Prioritize the people who spend money, ignore the people who don't." "And how did they decide who was spending money?" Daniel hesitated. "Appearance mostly. Clothes, luggage, cars in the parking lot. And yes, race was a factor. Not always explicit, but it was there." Marcus stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the hallway, feeling the weight of everything he'd heard settling onto his shoulders. He'd built this place with his own money, his own vision, his own sweat. He'd written policies specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of thing. And somehow, despite all of that, his resort had become a place where people like him were made to feel unwelcome. How did this happen, Daniel? His voice was quiet, more tired than angry. How did we get here? Daniel took a long moment before answering. I think the policies were there, but the follow-through wasn't. We hired people, trained them once, and then assumed they'd internalize the values. We didn't check. We didn't monitor. We let the metrics drive behavior without asking what kind of behavior they were driving. And when complaints came in, we addressed them individually. Coaching sessions, reminders, slaps on the wrist. We never looked at the pattern. We never asked if there was a systemic problem. It was easier to treat each incident as isolated. Until it wasn't isolated anymore. Until yesterday. Yes. Marcus started walking again, his footsteps heavy on the carpet. He reached the elevator and pressed the button, watching the numbers descend toward his floor. I want a complete overhaul, he said. New training programs, new metrics, new accountability structures. I want mystery shoppers of every race and background testing our service monthly. I want anonymous reporting channels for staff who witness discrimination. I want it to be impossible for this to happen again. That's going to take time and resources, sir. A lot of both. Then we spend the time and resources. What happened yesterday cost us a lot more than money. It cost us our integrity. And I'm going to get it back, whatever it takes. The elevator doors opened and Marcus stepped inside. He turned to face Daniel one last time. Thank you for your honesty today. It couldn't have been easy to acknowledge failures under your watch. Daniel's face was somber. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I failed you, Mr. Thompson. I failed the guests who came here expecting to be treated with dignity. I won't fail again. The doors closed, and Marcus rode up to his floor alone. Back in his room, he stood at the window and looked out at the ocean. The waves rolled in steady and patient, indifferent to the storms that raged on land. Somewhere out there, his son was counting down the days until Saturday. Counting down the hours until he could see his dad build sandcastles, chase waves, have the best vacation ever. Marcus was going to make sure that happened. No matter what else was going on, no matter how heavy the weight on his shoulders, he was going to be present for his son. But first he had one more thing to do. He pulled out his phone and found Sophie Langford's number in the HR file Daniel had sent him. His finger hovered over the call button for a long moment. What was he going to say? What could he possibly say that would matter? He pressed the button and waited. Sophie answered on the fourth ring, her voice hoarse and wrecked. Hello? Sophie, it's Marcus Thompson. A sharp intake of breath. Then silence. I'm not calling to yell at you, Marcus said. I'm not calling to threaten you or pile on more consequences. I wanted to check on you, to see how you're doing. More silence. Then very quietly. Why would you care how I'm doing? Because I'm not a monster. And I don't think you are either. I think you're a person who made a terrible mistake, and I think you're suffering for it. And despite everything that happened, I don't want you to destroy yourself over this. He heard a sob on the other end of the line, then another. Sophie was crying deep, wrenching sounds that spoke of more than just losing a job. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. I keep thinking about what I did, what I said, and I don't recognize the person who did those things. That's not who I want to be. That's not who I thought I was. Then use this as a starting point, not an ending. You lost your job, but you didn't lose your life. You can still become someone different, someone better. How do I even begin? By being honest with yourself, by looking at all the assumptions you've been carrying and asking where they came from, by doing the hard work that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Why are you being kind to me? After what I did to you, you should hate me. Maybe I should, but hate doesn't fix anything. It just burns you from the inside." Marcus paused, thinking of his father, of all the lessons learned in a lifetime of walking through a hostile world. "I've been hated my whole life by people who didn't know me, who looked at my skin and decided I was less than them. I know what that hate does. I refuse to carry it myself." He could hear Sophie trying to compose herself on the other end of the line. "Thank you," she said finally. "I don't deserve your kindness, but thank you. Take care of yourself, Sophie, and take care of your daughter. That's what matters now." He ended the call and set the phone down on the desk. Outside, the ocean continued its endless rhythm, wave after wave after wave. 2 more days until Saturday. 2 more days until Jalen arrived. Marcus was going to be ready. Friday passed in a blur of meetings, reports, and difficult conversations. Marcus spent the morning reviewing the preliminary findings from the anonymous staff interviews. Dorothy Williams had been true to her word. She'd come forward with detailed accounts of incidents she'd witnessed over 6 years, and her courage had inspired others to do the same. By the end of the day, Daniel had collected statements from 23 employees, most of them housekeepers, maintenance workers, and kitchen staff, who had never been asked their opinions about anything before. The picture that emerged was damning. Discrimination wasn't just happening at the front desk. It was woven into the fabric of the entire operation. Guests of color were assigned rooms farther from amenities. Families who looked like they couldn't afford it received slower service at the restaurant. Complaints from certain guests were taken less seriously than others. Marcus read every statement, feeling the weight of each one settle onto his shoulders. This was his resort, his responsibility, and he had failed. Late Friday afternoon, he called an all-staff meeting. The conference room was packed. Housekeepers stood along the walls, still in their uniforms. Kitchen workers filed in with their aprons. Front desk staff sat clustered together, their faces tense with anxiety. Daniel stood near the door, watching everyone with wary eyes. Marcus walked to the front of the room and looked out at the assembled faces: black, white, Hispanic, Asian, young, old, nervous, defensive, hopeful. These were his employees. These were the people he was counting on to change. "I know you've all heard what happened on Wednesday," he began. "And I know you've heard that I'm the owner of this resort. What you might not know is why I came here the way I did, in plain clothes, with an old suitcase, without telling anyone who I was." He paused, letting the silence build. "I wanted to see the truth. I wanted to know how this place really operates when the boss isn't watching. And what I found..." He shook his head slowly. "What I found broke my heart." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at the floor. "I built Silver Harbor because I believed that hospitality should be equal. That every guest who walks through those doors deserves respect regardless of what they're wearing, or how much money they have, or what color their skin is. I wrote policies. I implemented training programs. I thought I'd created something different." His voice hardened. "I was wrong." The room went completely still. "Over the past 2 days, I've learned that discrimination has been happening here for years. Not from everyone, but from enough people that it became normal. It became part of the culture. And the worst part is, most of you didn't even realize you were doing it." He looked around the room, meeting eyes that quickly looked away. "I'm not here to blame you. I'm not here to fire everyone and start over. I'm here because I believe people can change, and I'm asking you to prove me right." He walked slowly along the front of the room, his voice growing more personal. "When I was 25 years old, I was a janitor at a Holiday Inn. I pushed a mop for 8 hours a night while guests walked past me like I was invisible. Some of them stepped over my wet floors without a word. Some of them looked at me like I was dirt. And I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to run a place like this, I would do it differently." He stopped and faced the crowd again. "I have that chance now. We have that chance. But it only works if everyone in this room commits to being better. Not just following policies, actually believing that every human being who walks through those doors deserves dignity. If you can't do that, if you can't look at a guest in worn clothes and treat them the same way you'd treat a billionaire, then this isn't the right place for you." He let those words sink in. Starting Monday, every employee will complete a new training program on equitable service. It's not optional. It's not a box to check. It's a fundamental requirement of working here. There will be monthly evaluations, mystery shoppers, anonymous reporting channels, and anyone who discriminates against a guest will be terminated immediately. No warnings, no second chances. A hand went up near the back of the room. Marcus nodded toward it. A young woman in a housekeeper's uniform spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Thompson, what if we see someone else doing something wrong? What if we're afraid to report it? That's exactly why we're creating anonymous channels. You can report without anyone knowing it was you. And I personally guarantee that there will be no retaliation against anyone who comes forward. In fact, I'm going to reward it. If your report leads to identifying and correcting a problem, you'll receive a bonus. Because protecting our guests is more important than protecting bad employees." Another hand went up. This time it was an older man from the maintenance crew. "Sir, I've been here 11 years. I've seen a lot of things change, a lot of managers come and go. How do we know this time is different?" Marcus looked at the man for a long moment. "You don't. Not yet. All I can give you is my word. And my word is that I'm not going anywhere. I'm not handing this off to someone else and hoping they follow through. I'm going to be here checking in, making sure these changes stick. And if they don't stick, I'm going to keep pushing until they do." He walked back to the center of the room. "I know some of you are scared. I know some of you are angry. I know some of you think this is all overblown, that what happened to me was just one bad employee making one bad decision. But it wasn't. It was a symptom of something deeper, something that's been growing in the dark because nobody shined a light on it." His voice softened. "I'm shining that light now. And I'm asking you to stand with me. Not because I'm the owner. Not because you're afraid of losing your jobs. But because it's right. Because every person who walks through those doors deserves the same treatment you'd want for yourself or your family." He looked around the room one final time. "That's all I have to say. If you have questions, Daniel will be available all afternoon. If you want to talk to me directly, my door is open. Thank you for listening." He walked out of the conference room feeling the weight of 100 stares on his back. He didn't know if his words had made a difference. He didn't know if hearts had been changed or if people were just nodding along to protect their jobs. But he'd said what needed to be said. The rest was up to them. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through everything that had happened, everything that still needed to happen. The investigation wasn't complete. The new training programs hadn't been designed yet. The culture he was trying to build was still just words on paper. And tomorrow, his son was coming. He thought about Jalen, about the excited voice messages and the drawings tucked into his suitcase. He thought about the world his boy was inheriting, a world that was still so far from what it should be, despite all the progress that had been made. What would he tell Jalen about this week? How much should an 8-year-old know about the ugliness that existed in the world? Marcus had been Jalen's age when his father took him to that department store. He remembered the security guards following them, the suspicious looks, the assumption of guilt based on nothing but skin color. He remembered asking his father why it happened, and his father's tired, sad response, "Because some people can't see past the color, son. They look at us and see something to fear instead of someone to know." Marcus had spent his whole life trying to become someone who couldn't be ignored. He'd built wealth, acquired power, earned respect in business circles that had once been closed to people like him. And yet, when he'd walked into his own resort in a plain t-shirt, he'd been invisible again. Dismissed. Dismissed. What was the lesson there? That success didn't protect you, that no amount of money could change how some people saw you, that the fight was never really over. He didn't want to teach Jalen cynicism. He didn't want his son growing up believing that the world was against him. But he also didn't want to lie to pretend that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. The balance was impossible. Every black parent in America struggled with it. How much truth to tell? How much hope to preserve? How to prepare your child for a world that might hurt them without making them bitter before they'd even had a chance to live? Marcus finally fell asleep sometime after 3 a.m., his dreams filled with waves and sandcastles and a little boy's laughter. Saturday morning arrived in a blaze of sunshine. Marcus woke early despite his restless night, his body buzzing with anticipation. He showered, dressed in shorts and a casual polo, and went downstairs for breakfast. The lobby felt different today, or maybe he was just seeing it differently. Staff members greeted him with careful smiles, their eyes watchful, their service precise. He couldn't tell if it was fear or genuine effort. Maybe both. Maybe that was how change started, with people trying so hard to do the right thing that eventually it became natural. He ate quickly and checked his phone. Jalen's grandmother had texted, "On the road, ETA 11:30. Someone is very excited." Marcus smiled and typed back a heart emoji. Then he went outside to wait. The car pulled up at exactly 11:42. Marcus saw his son's face pressed against the window. Before the vehicle even stopped, eyes wide with excitement, mouth moving in what was probably a stream of continuous chatter. The door flew open before the grandmother could even put the car in park, and Jalen came rocketing across the pavement like a small, enthusiastic missile. "Daddy!" Marcus dropped to one knee, just in time to catch the full force of his son's hug. Jalen's arms wrapped around his neck, squeezing tight, and Marcus buried his face in the boy's hair, breathing in the familiar smell of children's shampoo and barely contained energy. "Hey, buddy, I missed you." "I missed you too. Is this the hotel? It's so big. Can we go to the beach now? I brought my boogie board. Grandma said I could only bring one bucket, but I snuck two in my backpack. Don't tell her, okay?" Marcus laughed, the first real laugh in days. "Your secret's safe with me." Jalen pulled back just far enough to look at his father's face. His small features scrunched with concern. "Daddy, are you okay? You look tired." Trust a child to see what adults tried to hide. "I'm fine, buddy. Just been a busy week, but I'm all yours now. No work, no phone calls, just us." "You promise?" "I promise." Jalen's face split into a grin that could have powered the entire resort. "Can we build a sandcastle right now? Like right now?" "Let's get your bags first. Say goodbye to Grandma." Jalen ran back to the car where his grandmother was slowly extricating herself from the driver's seat. She was in her late 60s, a retired teacher with gray-streaked hair, and the kind of patient wisdom that came from decades of managing children. She'd been Denise's mother, and after the cancer took her daughter, she'd stepped in to help Marcus raise Jalen with a fierce, unconditional love. "Thank you for bringing him," Marcus said, embracing her. "Like I could have stopped him." She pulled back and studied his face with the same perceptive concern her grandson had shown. "You look exhausted, Marcus. What happened?" "Long story. I'll tell you later." Her tone said she knew there was more to it, and she'd be expecting that story. "You sure you're okay?" "I will be. Having him here." Marcus looked at Jalen, who was now dragging his suitcase toward the entrance with determined effort. "That's the best medicine." The grandmother followed his gaze and smiled softly. "He's been talking about this trip for weeks. Every night at dinner, it was, 'Daddy this and Daddy that.' You're his whole world, you know." "He's mine too." They watched Jalen struggle with the suitcase for another moment before a bellman hurried over to help. Marcus noted with satisfaction that the young man was solicitous and friendly, treating Jalen like a VIP regardless of his Star Wars t-shirt and light-up sneakers. Small victories. The grandmother declined the invitation to stay for lunch, citing the long drive back and a book club meeting she couldn't miss. She hugged Jalen fiercely, whispered something in his ear that made him giggle, and then she was gone, her sedan disappearing down the resort's winding drive. "Okay, buddy." Marcus took his son's hand. "Let's get you settled in, and then we can hit the beach." "Yes, beach, sandcastle, dolphins." I'm not sure about dolphins, but we'll definitely look for them. They walked into the lobby together, father and son, and Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. This was why he'd built all of this. Not for the money, not for the power, but for moments like this. The chance to give his son experiences, memories, a foundation of love and security that would carry him through whatever challenges life threw his way. The afternoon that followed was exactly what Marcus needed. They built sandcastles, elaborate ones with moats and towers and shells pressed into the walls like windows. Jalen directed the construction with the imperious confidence of an 8-year-old architect, while Marcus did the heavy lifting, hauling bucket after bucket of wet sand from the water's edge. "No, Daddy, the tower goes there. You're doing it wrong." "My apologies, Mr. Architect. I'll move it immediately." "That's better." They swam in the waves, Jalen shrieking with delight every time the water lifted him off his feet. They searched for seashells and found a piece of sea glass that Jalen declared was treasure from a mermaid. They ate ice cream cones on the beach, chocolate dripping down their fingers while seagulls circled hopefully overhead. For a few perfect hours, Marcus forgot about everything else. Forgot about Sophie and the investigation and the culture he was trying to change. Forgot about the weight of responsibility that usually pressed on his shoulders. He was just a father playing with his son, and that was enough. As the afternoon wore on, they retreated to the resort's pool area. Jalen wanted to try the water slide. "It looks so cool. Daddy, please, please, please." And Marcus relented, watching his boy climb the stairs and zoom down the slide with gleeful abandon over and over again. He was sitting on a lounge chair, half watching Jalen and half lost in his thoughts, when a familiar voice spoke beside him. "Mr. Thompson." He looked up. Dorothy Williams stood there, not in her housekeeping uniform, but in regular clothes, a simple dress and sandals, her gray hair down around her shoulders. She looked different out of uniform, younger somehow, less burdened. "Dorothy, please sit down." She settled into the chair beside him, her eyes following Jalen as he climbed the slide stairs again. "That your son?" "That's him, Jalen. He's 8. "Beautiful boy." She smiled softly. "Reminds me of my grandson at that age. All energy, no off switch." "That's Jalen in a nutshell." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the children play. Then Dorothy spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "I heard your speech yesterday, the all-staff meeting. What did you think?" "I think you meant every word, and I think that scares some people." "Scares them how?" Dorothy considered the question. "Change is hard, especially for folks who've been doing things a certain way for a long time. Some of them don't want to admit they've been doing it wrong. Some of them don't even think they've been doing anything wrong, they just think that's how the world works. And you? What do you think?" "I think the world works however we make it work, and I think it's about time someone made it work better." Marcus nodded slowly. "I hope I can. I hope this isn't just words that fade away once I'm not here watching." "It won't fade if you don't let it." Dorothy turned to face him directly. "You know what I noticed yesterday? After your speech, I saw Kevin Morrison talking to one of the new bellhops. Young black kid just started last month. Kevin was telling him to always greet every guest no matter what they look like. Said he learned that lesson the hard way. You think he meant it? I think he's trying, and sometimes trying is how you get to meaning it." Jalen came running up, then dripping wet and grinning. "Daddy, did you see that I went so fast?" The lifeguard said I was the bravest kid he'd seen all day. "I saw it, buddy. You were amazing." "Can I go again? Just one more time, please?" "One more, then we need to clean up for dinner." "Yes!" Jalen sprinted back toward the slide, nearly slipping on the wet concrete before catching himself. Dorothy laughed. "That boy is a handful." "He's the best handful I've ever had." Dorothy stood up, preparing to leave. "I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Thompson, for listening, for caring. Most folks in your position, they don't bother to know people like me. They don't ask questions. They don't try to understand. I was you once, pushing a mop in a hotel lobby while people looked through me like I wasn't there. I never forgot how that felt. And that's exactly why you're different." She reached out and patted his shoulder, a gesture that was both maternal and deeply respectful. "You take care of that boy. And take care of yourself. This place is lucky to have you." She walked away and Marcus watched her go, feeling something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe, or the first fragile stirrings of belief that things really could get better. Dinner that night was room service on the balcony. Marcus had considered taking Jalen to the resort's restaurant, but after everything that had happened, he wanted privacy. He wanted to focus entirely on his son, without worrying about whether staff were treating them differently, without feeling the weight of curious stares. They ordered hamburgers and French fries. Jalen's choice, and ate while watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The sky turned orange, then pink, then deep purple, and Jalen provided a running commentary on which colors were his favorites, and what he would name them if he was in charge of naming colors. "That one's called Dragonfire," he declared, pointing at a streak of orange. "And that pink one is Unicorn Sneeze." Unicorn Sneeze? Yeah, because when unicorns sneeze, sparkles come out, and that color is sparkly. Marcus couldn't argue with that logic. After dinner, they settled onto the bed to watch a movie, some animated adventure about a robot and a space dog that Jalen had seen only like 5 times. "Daddy, I promise." Marcus suspected the real number was closer to 20, but he didn't mind. Jalen curled up against his side, warm and small, his eyes growing heavy as the movie played. Halfway through, Jalen spoke, his voice drowsy. "Daddy?" "Yeah, buddy. Are you happy?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He looked down at his son's face, so innocent, so trusting, and felt his heart crack open a little. "I'm happy right now. With you. This is exactly where I want to be." "But were you sad before? When you came here?" Marcus hesitated. How much truth was appropriate for an 8-year-old? How much should he protect, and how much should he share? "I had some hard days," he said finally. "Some things happened that made me sad and angry, but being with you makes it better." Jalen was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Grandma says you work too hard. She says you carry the whole world on your shoulders, and you never let anyone help." "Grandma talks too much." "She said you'd say that." Marcus laughed despite himself. "Did she?" "Uh-huh." Jalen snuggled closer, his eyes nearly closed now. "I don't want you to be sad, Daddy. I want you to be happy all the time." "I know, buddy, and I'm working on it. I promise." "Good." Jalen yawned, a huge, jaw-cracking yawn that seemed to take over his entire body. "Love you, Daddy. Love you too, buddy. More than anything in the world." Within minutes, Jalen was asleep, his breathing slow and even, his small hand still clutching the fabric of Marcus's shirt. The movie played on, but Marcus wasn't watching. He was looking at his son's face, memorizing every detail. Feeling the fierce, overwhelming love that had defined his life ever since Denise placed this tiny human in his arms 8 years ago. This was what mattered. Not the business, not the money, not the fight against discrimination, or the quest for respect. This small person, this precious life that depended on him, this was everything. Whatever challenges came next, whatever battles he had to fight, Marcus would face them for Jalen. Because his son deserved a better world than the one that existed today. And if Marcus couldn't change the whole world, he could at least change the parts of it that he controlled. He gently extracted himself from Jalen's grip, careful not to wake him, and carried the boy to his bed. He tucked the covers around him, pressed a kiss to his forehead, and stood there for a long moment, just watching him sleep. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the dark ocean, the waves invisible now but still audible, still constant. Tomorrow they would have another perfect day. And the day after that. And the day after that. Marcus was going to make sure of it. Because his son deserved perfect days. They all did. Sunday morning began with pancakes. Marcus woke before Jalen ordered room service and had the table on the balcony set up by the time his son stumbled out of bed, hair sticking up in every direction, eyes still heavy with sleep. "Daddy, what's that smell?" "Breakfast, your favorite." Jalen's eyes went wide when he saw the spread pancakes stacked high bacon glistening on the plate, a bowl of fresh strawberries and a tall glass of orange juice. He practically ran to the table, his tiredness forgotten. "This is the best vacation ever." They ate together, watching the morning sun paint the ocean in shades of gold. Jalen talked nonstop about the sandcastle they'd built yesterday, about the water slide, about the treasure piece of sea glass he'd hidden in his suitcase. Marcus listened to every word, savoring the simple joy of his son's voice. After breakfast, they headed back to the beach. Jalen wanted to build an even bigger sandcastle, the biggest one in the whole world, and Marcus was happy to oblige. They worked side by side, digging and shaping, while the waves rolled in and out just a few feet away. Midway through construction, Jalen looked up with a thoughtful expression. "Daddy?" "Yeah, buddy." "Why do some people treat other people mean?" Marcus's hand stopped moving. He looked at his son, at the innocent curiosity in those dark eyes, and felt his heart clench. "What do you mean?" "Like at school. Tommy Baker always picks on Marcus Jackson, calls him names, pushes him sometimes. Mrs. Henderson says it's wrong, but Tommy keeps doing it anyway." Jalen frowned, working through the problem in his mind. "I don't understand why. Marcus Jackson is nice. He shares his crayons with everyone." Marcus sat back on his heels, the sandcastle temporarily forgotten. This was the conversation he'd been dreading and hoping for, all at once, the chance to help his son make sense of a world that often didn't make sense at all. "Some people are mean because they're scared," he said slowly. "They see something different about another person, maybe the way they look, or where they come from, or how much money their family has, and instead of being curious or kind, they get scared. And scared people sometimes do mean things." Jalen considered this. But why would Tommy be scared of Marcus Jackson? Marcus isn't scary. He's smaller than everyone. It's not about being scared of that person specifically. It's about being scared of different. Some people grow up learning that different is bad, that people who don't look like them or act like them are somehow less important. And when you believe that you treat people badly without even thinking about it, that's dumb. Marcus couldn't help but smile. "Yeah, buddy, it is dumb. But it happens a lot, even with grown-ups, even with people who should know better." Jalen was quiet for a moment, drawing patterns in the wet sand with his finger. Then he asked the question Marcus had been expecting. "Does that ever happen to you, Daddy? Do people treat you mean because you look different?" Marcus took a deep breath. How much truth was too much? How much would help and how much would hurt? "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not everyone. Most people are good, and they treat me with respect. But sometimes I meet people who look at me and see only my skin color. They decide I don't belong somewhere, or I'm not as important as other people, just because of how I look." Jalen's face clouded with distress. "That's not fair. You're the best person I know." "Thank you, buddy. But here's the thing, what those people think doesn't change who I am. Their meanness doesn't make me less. It just makes them wrong." "But doesn't it make you sad?" Marcus reached out and put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Sometimes, but mostly it makes me determined. Determined to prove them wrong. Determined to build things that show what I'm capable of. And determined to raise you to be the kind of person who treats everyone with respect no matter what they look like." Jalen nodded seriously, as if accepting a sacred mission. "I already do that. I share my crayons with everyone, even Tommy Baker, even though he's mean. That's my boy. And when I grow up, I'm going to be like you. I'm going to build stuff and help people and not let anyone tell me I can't." Marcus felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He pulled Jalen into a tight hug, holding his son against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of that small heart. "You're already on your way, buddy. You're already the best person I know." They stayed like that for a long moment, father and son surrounded by sand and sea and the complicated, beautiful mess of the world. Then Jalen pulled back his eyes determined. Okay, let's finish this sandcastle. It needs to be the biggest one ever, so everyone can see it. Marcus laughed and picked up his bucket. You got it, boss. The rest of the day passed in a golden haze. They finished the sandcastle, which was indeed impressive, complete with a moat that actually held water, and a flag made from a stick and a napkin. They swam until their fingers pruned. They had lunch at the beach cafe where Jalen charmed the waitress into giving him an extra scoop of ice cream for dessert. In the afternoon, they went back to the pool, and Jalen convinced Marcus to race him down the water slide. Marcus lost, though he suspected he could have won if he'd really tried. The joy on his son's face was worth any number of defeats. By evening, they were both exhausted in the best possible way. They ordered pizza to the room and ate it in bed, watching another movie, this one about a talking dog who saved the world from aliens. Jalen fell asleep before the ending, curled up against Marcus's side like a small warm anchor. Marcus didn't move. He lay there in the dark, listening to his son breathe, thinking about everything that had happened since he'd arrived at this resort 5 days ago. He thought about Sophie Langford, about the slap that still felt like it had happened yesterday. He thought about Kevin Morrison and James Hendricks and Tyler Chen, about the interviews and the confessions and the small painful steps toward accountability. He thought about Dorothy Williams and her courage, about the anonymous statements from housekeepers and kitchen workers who had finally been given a voice. He thought about the culture he was trying to change, the policies he was implementing, the long road that still stretched ahead. And he thought about his father. James Thompson had died 7 years ago, just 6 months before Jalen was born. He'd never met his grandson, never seen what Marcus had built, never known that the boy who'd pushed a mop at a Holiday Inn would one day own resorts like this one. But Marcus carried his father with him every day, in the way he worked, in the values he held, in the determination to prove that where you started didn't have to define where you ended up. "I'm trying, Dad," he whispered into the darkness. "I'm trying to make you proud." There was no answer, of course, just the sound of waves outside the window and his son's steady breathing. But somehow Marcus felt heard. Monday morning arrived, and with it the end of the vacation. Jalen's grandmother came to pick him up at noon, and the goodbye was harder than Marcus had expected. Jalen clung to him, his small arms wrapped tight around his father's neck. "I don't want to go. I want to stay with you forever." "I know, buddy. I want that too. But you've got school, and I've got work, and we'll see each other again soon. I promise." "How soon?" 2 weeks. I'll come visit and we'll have another adventure." Jalen pulled back his eyes, searching Marcus's face for any sign of a lie. Finding none, he nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but you have to call me every night." "Every night. I promise. And send me pictures of the ocean." "Done." "And don't be sad." "Okay, I don't want you to be sad when I'm not here." Marcus felt his heart crack all over again. "I'll try, buddy. I'll try." The grandmother took Jalen's hand and gently guided him toward the car. At the door, Jalen turned back one more time. "I love you, Daddy, to the moon and back." "To the moon and back, buddy. To the moon and back." The car pulled away, and Marcus stood in the lobby watching until it disappeared from sight. The emptiness that settled over him was familiar. The particular loneliness of a single parent who loved his child more than anything but couldn't be with him all the time. He was still standing there when Daniel approached, tablet in hand, face carefully neutral. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you should see." Marcus followed Daniel to the conference room, where the regional director pulled up a video on the large screen. It was security footage from the lobby, time-stamped Saturday morning. "This happened while you were at the beach with your son." The footage showed a family checking in, a young black couple with 2 small children. Marcus watched as they approached the front desk, where Tyler Chen was working. He braced himself for the worst, but what he saw was different. Tyler greeted the family with a genuine smile. He processed their check-in quickly, efficiently, and then came around the desk to help them with their luggage. He crouched down to talk to the children, pointing toward the pool area, making them laugh. He called over a bellman Kevin Morrison, Marcus noted, who took the bags with the same cheerful professionalism he'd shown to Jalen. The family walked away, smiling. The parents exchanging pleased looks, the children bouncing with excitement. Marcus watched the footage twice, looking for any sign of the dismissive behavior he'd experienced. He found none. "This has been happening all weekend," Daniel said quietly. "Every guest, every check-in, the staff is different. I don't know if it's fear or genuine change, but the behavior has shifted." "Show me more." Daniel pulled up additional footage. An elderly Hispanic couple being escorted to the restaurant with particular care. A single mother in sweatpants being treated with the same courtesy as a businesswoman in designer clothes. A black teenager checking in alone for a college visit tour being helped with directions and recommendations, as if he were a VIP. "Guest satisfaction scores from the weekend are the highest they've been in 6 months, Daniel said. "And we've received 3 positive reviews, specifically mentioning how welcoming and respectful the staff was." Marcus sat back in his chair, processing what he was seeing. It was too early to declare victory. A few days of improved behavior didn't erase years of ingrained prejudice. The real test would come in the months ahead, when the memory of what had happened faded and old habits tried to creep back. But this was a start. This was evidence that change was possible, that people could learn that the culture he'd been trying to build wasn't just a fantasy. "Keep monitoring," he said finally. "Keep the mystery shoppers coming. Keep the anonymous reporting channels open, and keep me informed of any backsliding." "Yes, sir." "And Daniel." "Sir. Thank you for being honest with me, for helping me see what was really happening here. I know it wasn't easy." Daniel's face softened slightly. "It was necessary. And for what it's worth, sir, I'm grateful you gave me the chance to be part of fixing it." Marcus spent the rest of the day in meetings with HR about the new training programs, with legal, about updated policies, with marketing, about how to communicate the resort's commitment to equitable service without sounding performative. It was exhausting work, the kind of detailed grinding effort that never made headlines but actually changed things. By evening, he was ready to leave. His bag was packed, his car was waiting in the lot, and there was nothing keeping him here except a strange reluctance to go. He walked through the lobby one last time, looking at the space where everything had changed. The marble floors still gleamed, the chandeliers still sparkled. The front desk was staffed by the evening shift faces. He didn't recognize people who had heard about what happened, but hadn't witnessed it firsthand. "Mr. Thompson." He turned. Dorothy Williams was standing near the elevator, still in her housekeeping uniform, a cart of supplies beside her. "I heard you were leaving tonight. Wanted to say goodbye." Marcus walked over to her. "Thank you for everything, Dorothy, for your honesty, for your courage. This place is better because of you." Dorothy shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "I just told the truth. You're the one who did something with it. The truth matters. It always matters." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes wise and knowing. "You take care of yourself, Mr. Thompson, and take care of that beautiful boy of yours. He's lucky to have you as a father." "I'm lucky to have him." Dorothy reached out and squeezed his hand, a brief gesture that carried the weight of shared understanding. Then she turned back to her cart and pushed it toward the elevator, disappearing into the ordinary rhythms of her work. Marcus walked out of the resort and into the warm evening air. His Honda was waiting where he'd left it, a humble car, in a lot full of luxury vehicles. He loaded his suitcase into the trunk and stood there for a moment, looking back at the building he owned. 5 days ago, he'd walked into this place wanting to see the truth. He'd found more truth than he'd bargained for, ugly truths about the culture he'd unintentionally allowed to flourish, painful truths about the gap between his values and his reality. But he'd also found hope. In Dorothy's courage. In the staff members who were genuinely trying to change. In his son's innocent determination to treat everyone with kindness. In his own refusal to accept a world where people were judged by the color of their skin instead of the content of their character. He thought about the slap again. Sophie's hand connecting with his face, the shock and rage and public humiliation. In that moment, she'd revealed everything. Her prejudice, her assumptions, her belief that some people mattered less than others. But she'd also given him a gift, a catalyst, a reason to stop assuming and start examining, to stop hoping and start acting. Without that slap, he might have checked in, enjoyed his vacation, and never known how broken things really were. Sometimes the worst moments opened the door to the best changes. Marcus got in his car and started the engine. The highway stretched ahead of him, the same road he'd traveled 5 days ago. But everything felt different now. He was different. Tired and hopeful, angry and determined, grieving what had been lost and committed to what could be built. His phone buzzed. A text from Jalen sent from his grandmother's phone. "I miss you already, Daddy. Don't forget to call tonight. Love you to the moon and back and around again." Marcus smiled, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. He typed back quickly. "Miss you too, buddy. Calling at bedtime. Love you more than all the stars in the sky." He put the phone down and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving Silver Harbor Resort behind. But he wasn't really leaving. He would be back, checking in, monitoring progress, making sure the changes stuck. He would hold this place to the standard it was supposed to meet. The standard every place should meet. Because that was the work. Not a single dramatic moment, not a satisfying victory, but a long, slow grind toward something better. Day after day, decision after decision, conversation after conversation. It was the kind of work his father had done his whole life, showing up, pushing forward, refusing to accept less than dignity, even when the world tried to convince him he didn't deserve it. Marcus thought about Jalen again, about the conversation they'd had on the beach. His son would grow up in a world that was still imperfect, still struggling with the same prejudices that had plagued his father and grandfather. There would be Sophies and his future people who would look at him and see something less than human. But there would also be Dorothys, people who told the truth even when it was hard, people who chose courage over comfort, people who believed that change was possible and fought for it anyway. And there would be Jalen himself, a boy who shared his crayons with everyone who wanted to build things and help people who already understood at 8 years old that the measure of a person had nothing to do with how they looked. That was the legacy Marcus was building. Not just hotels and resorts and balance sheets, but a son who would carry different values into the future. A son who would treat everyone with dignity because it was right, not because of who might be watching. The highway rolled by beneath his wheels, mile after mile. The sun set in his rearview mirror, painting the sky in Jalen's colors, dragon fire and unicorn sneeze. Marcus drove into the gathering darkness, tired, but not defeated, wounded, but not broken. He thought about what he would say when he called his son tonight. He would tell him about the ocean at sunset. He would ask about school and friends and what adventures were planned for the week ahead. He would say, "I love you," at least 3 times, because you could never say it too often. And maybe when Jalen was older, when he was ready to understand, Marcus would tell him the whole story. About walking into his own resort and being treated like a stranger. About a woman who slapped him because she thought he was nothing. About the investigation and the interviews and the long, hard work of changing a culture. He would tell his son that the fight wasn't over, might never be over, but that it was worth fighting anyway. Because every time you stood up for dignity, you made the world a little better. Every time you refused to accept disrespect, you showed others that it didn't have to be tolerated. Every time you treated someone with kindness, regardless of how they looked, you planted a seed that might grow into something beautiful. That was the lesson Marcus had learned from his father, the lesson he was passing on to his son, the lesson that would outlive all of them. Respect wasn't given based on wealth or status or appearance. Respect was a human right owed to every person simply because they existed. And anyone who forgot that truth would eventually face a reckoning. Marcus pulled onto the interstate, leaving the coast behind, heading back toward the life that waited for him. The investigation at Silver Harbor would continue. The training programs would be implemented. The culture would slowly, painfully, necessarily change. And in 2 weeks, he would see his son again. They would have another adventure, another perfect day, another chance to build something together. That was enough. That was everything. The road stretched ahead, dark and uncertain, full of challenges he couldn't see yet. But Marcus drove forward anyway because that was what you did. You kept moving. You kept building. You kept believing that the world could be better, and then you did the work to make it so. Not because it was easy, because it was right. The night closed in around him, and Marcus Thompson drove home, carrying with him the lesson that his father had taught him, the love that his son had given him, and the unshakable certainty that had defined his entire life. Every person deserves dignity. Every person deserves respect. And anyone who tried to tell him otherwise would learn one way or another exactly who they were dealing with, because Marcus Thompson was not invisible. He never had been, and he never would be again.